What's up, you guys? This is For the Femmes, and we have a really special guest today, Miss Rebecca. If you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I am a sex positive, kink affirming marriage and family therapist in training.
Incredible.
I know.
Music to my ears.
We were trying to do that. I was like, I can't even do our normal intro. Like, there's no way I'm saying all of that. So I was like, let me have you introduce yourself. As you can tell, I can't even speak. But me and Faith were saying how we've been looking for someone in this kind of area for so long because we're so intrigued by it and we think it's so fascinating. So we're so excited for today and to get all our questions answered.
Yeah, and we were just saying earlier when we were talking, I was like, our favorite thing to talk about is sex.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly. I love it.
Why do you think I'm making a career out of it?
I love
exactly.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
We're in the wrong career.
No, we're doing it.
Actually, we are. We can get to
We're doing it in our own way.
In our own way. So true. So true. So what do you identify as? Kind of what's your backstory? How did you get to this place?
Yeah. I love that question about what do you identify? It's actually something that comes up so often in therapy that I'm finding at the moment. And I think it's really interesting to think about sexual identity because I think when we think about sexuality, it's often so fluid, right?
Yeah.
And yet we live in a society where we love to people in boxes and give them labels and give them definitions. And for some people that works and that works really well and that's great and that's normal. And for other people, that doesn't work as well. And then they're left more confused by thinking, wow, should I be in that box? Is that my label? Are these my people? So I think for me, I kind of fall into that latter group. So I think I just call myself bisexual. But actually, I think if I interrogate the definition, bisexual is being attracted to both genders, whereas pansexual is kind of being attracted to everyone irrespective of gender. And I think I probably align with the definition of pansexual, but have given myself the label of bisexual, so I think
we all in our own way really are just fluid. Yeah. It's such a spectrum and it doesn't matter.
No.
Yeah.
I could care less about someone's label and,
But it's interesting because we ask it a lot. Though,
I know.
And I think that says a lot about the culture that we're in. And I often think, why?
Yeah.
I don't understand either.
It is so true. I think obviously back in the day, no one asked really if you're straight or gay. Now I feel like it's one of the first questions when I'm on a date. Someone will ask either I think I ask or someone will ask me. And I find it so interesting. I don't know. I'm I guess for some people it might matter that I still like guys or a guy that I do like girls. But it is so interesting that I think it is one of the first questions that are asked when someone's getting to know me now.
Yeah. So interesting. And it's definitely coming up in therapy a lot. And I think, it's important to take time to explore for sure. And you should be able to explore what's authentic and what's good for you. But if a label doesn't work with that, then
that's okay.
Yeah.
I was talking with my friend's niece a couple of weeks ago and I was like, oh, do you have gay people in your school and different things like that? She's like, oh yeah. It's just fluid.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to hear that generation. That's how it should be.
Yeah.
People can just be who they are. You don't need to come out. And, for some families, obviously that's different. But that's kind of what I always envisioned too, to be when I have a kid one day, to be able to just be no, just do whatever you want. If you want to have a boyfriend one day or if you want to have a girlfriend or whatever, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel the need to come out.
Yeah. And I think it's, when we think about history, I think it is important to remember how far we've come. And that's really pleasing to hear that the next generation does have a different approach and that approach is more open and fluid. And I think as we move on, as time progresses, hopefully we will see it move more in that direction.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
What are some common issues you see that make people want to seek out a sex therapist specifically, or maybe somebody who's a couples therapist but also has that piece a part of it?
Yeah. I mean, the question that always pops up is, am I normal? And I think, that again is often reflective of our wider culture that makes some people feel normal and others feel not normal. And I just want to rip that word normal up, take it out of the dictionary and just burn it because I don't think it's helpful. I think it's very restrictive. I think it can garner a lot of shame within people. And there's this sex therapist called Tammy Nielsen who says, normal is a setting on a washing machine. It doesn't mean anything. And I think that's like so brilliant when we think about sex and sexuality and gender, is just trying to help people see that as long as the sex that you're engaging in is consensual, as long as you and the people that you're engaging with are able to access pleasure, whatever that means for them, and as long as you're not gaining any sort of sustained harm to either you or the other people, then I think that's normal and that's good and that's great. So I think that is often one that comes in, and I love going into that and dissecting that with people and with couples and people in alternative relationships. Also, I mean, the desire discrepancy, you know, my partner wants to have a lot of sex. I don't want to have a lot of sex. Is that normal? Yes. Is that good? Yes, we can work with that.
How do you navigate that? I really struggled in a few relationships with that, and it was so hard, and I was left feeling like unwanted and undesired, which like truly like made me feel so insecure and brought me to like such a low place.
And it can often do that. And I think when people come in to couples therapy, often they are at their like the worst place, you know, and you see that there's a bit of like a chasm that might have opened up between them. And one person is feeling really hurt and rejected, and the other person often is feeling hurt and rejected as well. But they've stopped communicating. And so they move further and further apart. I think with the question around desire, I also think this is another word that I think can sometimes be helpful and can sometimes be unhelpful. So I often start with a bit of education around desire and where our idea of desire comes from. So there's actually a piece of research that was done in the 70s by Masters and Johnson, who were the kind of first people to really research sex. It was seen as being this huge pioneering moment, and it was. And I think it was heterosexual couples, they put them in a sort of like CAT scan and they made them have sex and they mapped their whole body. It must have been very invasive. I know.
The med kink.
It must be a new kink.
But from that, they mapped this sexual response cycle. And they said that sex goes from excitement to plateau to orgasm. And that's it. And so excitement is your sort of like physical reactions. You know, you're getting wetter or the penis is getting erect. And that was what they measured as excitement. And then plateau, they said, is this state, which sometimes it's called reverie, where people go, you know, you're accessing pleasure, your heart rate is increasing, your parts of your brain are starting to switch off, you know, you're really stimulated. And then orgasm, they see as being like the crescendo at the end. And that was seen as being like a really pivotal piece of research, but it didn't quite answer all the questions. And so the next piece of research was like, well, what about desire? Desire's got to come first. So the next iteration was that there would be desire, and then there would be excitement, and then there would be orgasm. And I think that piece of research has really stuck. So people think there's got to be desire. And if there's no desire, we're never getting to the orgasm. And indeed, we're going to maybe give up or maybe move away from our partner, or we're going to feel like we are not normal. And I think when you're feeling not normal, it's really hard to then go on and engage sexually with your partner. And actually, I think for some people that is the way that it works, but that's not the way it works for everyone. And we know that now. And for other people, they don't start with that desire. They don't start with that, like, I want to rip your clothes off, I want to jump on you movie scene.
I think like for me, it wasn't like that didn't necessarily matter to me, but it was like in general, like I didn't feel like wanted. And I think that, at least for me, that was kind of like where the desire, I was like, I don't think you like want to like touch me. You know, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I need you to like feel something. Also, because like in a relationship, for me personally, if I'm not in the mood, I can still do something and then get in the mood, and then it like turns into, you know, a fun thing. But like some people aren't like that. They're like, no, I need to like, and I'm not going to be able to compromise. That's definitely how I felt.
And I think that taps into like bigger questions that I think often come up in therapy. You know, I think with sex, you often start with, you know, what's the challenge you're experiencing? But then you actually find that you're mapping a far wider tapestry of what's going on in the relationship, what's going on individually. If you're feeling like your partner doesn't want you, is that emotionally? Is that physically? Is that sexually? Where's that coming from?
Right.
You know, you start to kind of pull on those threads because I think often that it can widen a much bigger picture about the relationship, or sometimes it can just be about the sex. But I think for you, it sounds like there was
for sure
something else going on there.
For sure. And that's why we are not together.
Yes.
I have a question. Do you think sex compatibility is super important in a relationship? Because I think we both have experienced relationships where the sex compatibility did not match up and it became issues and problems. But is that for everyone? Do you think it's super important to kind of be on the same page with sex and sex compatibility? Or do you think it's like not that big a deal?
You know, I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it really depends on the individual and on the couple. I think for some people, you know, say incompatibility is maybe you have a different approach to sex or you have a different appetite for sex. I think as long as you're there and you're communicating and you're being vocal about it and you're showing up for one another and you're really showing that you care and that you love, I think that can be fine. I think if there is an inconsistency with what you both want from your sexual intimacy and you're not talking about it and one person's reaching out and the other person is moving away and then you get into that sort of pursue or distancer cycle where one person is pursue and the other person is distance, that's going to bring in, there's a lot of opportunity for feelings of rejection or shame or loneliness, I think, as well in that. So I think it depends on how you approach it. And I also, you know, I want to say on the desire thing, the other piece for the people that are less instant desires, that they are potentially more responsive desire. And I think sometimes people that are responsive desire, because we don't talk about responsive desire, don't necessarily get the opportunity to really dig into what that means for them. And so they can often say, I'm just not that into sex, or we don't really have a lot of sex, or I'm, you know, I'm too busy, or however they describe it, when actually I think if we take time to explore what their kind of accelerators and brakes are with regards to sex, then they can actually deepen into themselves as a sexual being and really start to explore how they get themselves turned on. Because I think it's a little bit on us as well as our partner. Absolutely. I think often we put it all on our partner, but it is on us to kind of understand that and then lean in.
Yeah.
What do you think about a couple who, or what would you, I guess, tell a couple if like one partner wants to have sex more than the other? They have different sex drives.
I mean, I would start by asking, is that okay for them? If they're okay with it right now, then there's no need to jump in and try and fix something that isn't a problem.
Yeah.
I think
it wouldn't be okay for me.
It wouldn't be okay?
No, I would be like, no. Like, I think for me, sex is a way that I feel loved.
Okay.
And so I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And I always wonder with things like this, does it go back to a specific reason why like Faithlyn might feel wanted and loved through sex more than like other ways? Whereas I feel like some other people like feel really wanted, like if someone's like always doing something for them, like is there like something like
it's not the only way.
No, it's not the only. No.
No, like as long as there's I'm not a fucking. It's just like intimacy in general. Like
I always wonder, does it go back to like childhood, or does it go back to like just like maybe it's just like the person?
I think you're trying to ask like if somebody has had sexual trauma, if that causes them to be hypersexual. I mean, I think just intimacy in general doesn't have to be sex, but I think
that's a really important point.
Yeah, you know, physical touch and all, like feeling like, you know, we're connected physically as well as emotionally is really important to me, and that's if that can be, you know, consistent. But yeah, I think sex is a part of my love language, and I think it's important for me to have that consistently. Whereas like some people don't necessarily need that. And so what would you tell someone who's like, no, I want to have sex more, but my partner kind of doesn't? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, you also touched upon something interesting. I'm going to touch upon the first part and then the second part, that it doesn't just have to be sex. It's about that intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think that is really important to explain to couples when sometimes one person feels as though they're not getting what they need. Do we focus in on sex, or is it actually more of a broader picture of, are they getting what they need in terms of their intimate connection?
Absolutely.
And that also can be an erotic connection as well. But eroticism doesn't just need to mean sex.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think we often forget about the other parts. And there's this idea of a sexual thread that can be really important for maintaining sustained sexual connection. And the idea of a sexual thread is that we should want to carry a thread of eroticism between sexual encounters, because that continues the build and the suspense and the excitement.
Yeah.
And so it's things like, if you would like to send your partner a flirty message every now and again, or just a cheeky little wink, or, like a grab as you go past them, a consensual grab.
Yeah. Everything consensual.
Yeah, everything consensual. Or, there's something steamy about like putting on a certain cologne that they like not having to have every encounter end in sex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But making sure that you're seeding in pieces of erotic, intimate connection, because then that lets your partner know that you are thinking of them and that you see them as this sexual being and that you're excited by their presence. And I think, and that also builds the tension for the next time that you do have a sexual encounter. And tension is really good for sex.
Yeah, I felt like when that piece is fulfilled for me, I don't need to have sex as much.
Yeah.
And that was like the thing too. But yeah, I definitely know some couples who, want to have sex more than others. And I still think, I'm like, how do you navigate that? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that is something that I think sex therapists or sex-informed therapists are really good at helping people navigate, because what we'd want to do is really understand from both individuals a lot about their history, a lot about their history, a lot about what sex means to them, about what intimacy means, about what their previous partners shared in terms of intimacy, about what the messaging they learned when they grew up. What did their parents share? Did they feel intimacy with their parents, or did they feel like they've never had intimacy? And do they know what intimacy is when they're looking for it? And I think all of these things are really important to explore, but they are quite dependent on that individual couple, because it's the way those two people come together that really is the magic, but also is some of the challenge.
What are your thoughts on somebody who doesn't feel deserving of pleasure or having an orgasm? Because I personally went through a phase where I was like, oh, I don't need to finish, or you don't have to touch me, because like there was this weird, like I didn't feel like I like deserved it, or that I should. I don't know. It was like weird. I think like after having that relationship where that was a struggle, I went through a period of like months feeling that way.
Interesting. So in the relationship, did you feel as though that was kind of taken away from you?
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, it can be, I think it's really good when we have our partner in therapy with us, but we definitely work on people individually as well. And it can be helping that person, say, you maybe reestablish that connection with yourself first and foremost. And I think, something that often happens in sex therapy is you sort of take sex out of the picture. You say, don't have sex. Because I think for some of us, if we get stuck in a difficult cycle, then we just we keep trying and we keep trying and we keep trying, and it gets harder and harder and harder. Yeah. And so I actually think saying, okay, let's just get rid of sex and sex
work on the intimacy.
I think sex is, a very broad picture. Yeah. And you work on, and there are things like sensate focus, where you just work on reconnecting with the sense of touch and really like thinking about your individual senses and getting deeply connected back in your body, especially if you've had a relationship where you feel as though your control over your own body was not your own, and in some way it was taken away from you, maybe either physically or emotionally. I think helping people get reconnected with their own body in a sensual but not sexual way can be really important with re-establishing that kind of erotic connection.
It's funny that you say it, because unintentionally I basically was like celibate for like a few months, and it helped me be able to have sex again and allow myself to experience pleasure and allow somebody to like take care of me in that way.
And it sounds like there's a big theme of that control. And I think often that can happen for so many people if they've been in difficult relationships or for any individuals that have experienced trauma. Control can be a huge part of that recovery. And how does that person go about reclaiming the control that was taken away from them?
Yeah. Interesting.
What do you think some misconceptions are with sex therapy? Because I know like we always talk about couples therapy or sex therapy. Like if I, back in the day, not anymore, but like when I was not knowledgeable, like if I heard someone going to couples therapy, but like, oh, they're having issues, like they're not making it. Or sex therapy, I'm like, oh God. Are they bad in bed? Like, what are some like misconceptions that people have around this kind of therapy?
Fantastic
so
question.
Many.
Like how long?
A million.
I mean, I've had people assume that it's going to be physical. Yeah, that's happened before. Luckily, we do a consultation first before we jump into the first session. So I was having a consultation. I was like, okay. Oh, sorry. Do you think? No, this is talk therapy.
Yeah.
So I think that first and foremost.
Did you end up taking that client?
I mean, I would always offer a session. You know, I think that is. I think it's really important to talk about why they needed it to be physical. Because I think there's a whole bunch of questions there, right? Can they?
I love therapists because you just think about things.
Yeah, like I wouldn't even thought about that.
Exactly.
So true.
Exactly.
And as a sex-affirming, sex-positive therapist, you know, I think the best place to work out those questions, if you think that every relationship, professional or personal, has to start with physical intimacy, that's probably going to be a challenge at some point in your life. So better if you work it out with me in a professional setting, be that non-touching.
Yeah.
So true.
Through Zoom.
I offered them a session. They never turned up. I think that was not what they wanted.
Okay.
So I hope they got the help that they wanted.
Yeah.
I'm sure they found it somewhere.
Yeah. There's another misconception that we're going to fix people. I think that assumption is predicated on the fact people feel like they're broken. I don't think anyone is broken. So I'm not going to fix you, but I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you help yourself.
Yeah.
And then I think I don't know if it's an assumption, but I think I mentioned the idea that people often come when they're really at their wit's end, which can be really hard as a therapist to then help navigate. So I would always advocate coming sooner rather than later.
I always say that. I'm like, in my relationship, I want to do couples therapy fairly early on.
Great.
Because I did that in my last relationship where it was like, it was already over and we were already at the point of no return.
Yeah.
Faith and I both did couples therapy when it was like
gone.
It was done. Like we don't know why we tried, but we actually know why we tried because we did try. We thought that's what we wanted. It's not, obviously, and we are better off, and everyone else is better off.
Yeah,
I just
but I think right.
I don't know.
I think even if even if you do think you've got one foot out the door or the relationship is maybe not going to last, I still think couples therapy is good because if you don't do any of the work at the end, you're carrying that baggage right into your next relationship.
1,000%. 1,000%.
There is a sex therapist called Susan Iasenza. Might pronounce her name wrong, but she says all sex is group sex. Because even if there are two of you in the bed, you're coming in with your previous relationships, with your family, with any trauma that you might have experienced, with your cultural messaging, with your religious messaging. All of that is in the bed with you.
Yeah.
And I think
that's deep.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. And if you're not talking about that, it's going to get real crowded and you're going to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So we got to be able to find a way, either between, the people that you're in that relationship with to bring it in, or if you need other people, come and talk to me.
I have a question. What would you say to a couple that maybe someone's really into this certain kink, but the other couple's like the other person in the couple, the other person is not?
Yeah.
How did that work?
I was going to ask that. That's so good.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like truly I think with kink and sex, it's all about like getting that pleasure and like what pleasures you, and like if that is something so important to someone but the other person can't get on board to it, like what are their options?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and definitely one that comes up. I think I really like to explore with both people what that kink means to both individuals. So to the person who really enjoys it, what's their history with it? You know, how do they enact it? What feelings does it give? What sensations does it bring in? What pleasure do they gain? And through doing that, and having the other partner be there to witness, what you can help do is sort of model some really nice curiosity and conversational techniques.
Yeah.
Because I think often we can get our guard can go up when we're confused, or when we don't know a lot, or when we're frightened, or when there's misconceptions. There can be other reasons as well, but those ones are quite common. And so being able to build some empathy by showing what this fetish does for this partner, what this partner receives from it, I think can be really important for the partner who has concerns.
Right.
And then on the other side, it's taking time to walk through for the partner who has concerns where their concerns come from, because they're equally as valid. And I think understanding, you know, what they know about the other partner's fetish and what they perceive it to be, and what their relationship is with their own sexuality, where their like boundary points are. And so I think it starts by sort of building empathy for both sides. And then I think it's about how do they co-create a space where this is either integrated, or where that one partner is maybe able to explore that on their own. And what does that bring up for the partner who is not willing to explore? And I think it's then a conversation for them to have together about where they see this and how they want to integrate it, if they want to integrate it. And if they don't want to integrate it, is that partner allowed to hold space for that, for their own pleasure? Because I do think having separateness in a relationship is also good. But that might be a big ask for that other person.
I think too, what I'm noticing is the common theme is, I think as a couple, I think it sounds like you have to be ready to truly be able to have these conversations and compromise. Because there's truly, like, there really isn't like a right or wrong answer. But I imagine if a couple's coming to you and they're pretty firm on their own, you know, boundaries, like, it probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think maybe compromise is not a word that I would use, but it's how do you get them to hold both? How do you say that me showing up as who I am does not diminish who you are as your person? And I'm not saying that I'm going to change you and you're going to change me. But how can we both understand each other and build empathy for who we are, and hold love in that space, but not. I think if you're trying to change the other person, I think that can lead to challenges.
I think, like, I've been in relationships in the past where people weren't willing to kind of like hold space. It was just like, I'm this person, and, you know, that's that, kind of like take it or leave it. But then in my head, I'm like, maybe you're not ready for a relationship at that point if you can't do that and you can't have those conversations.
Well, and it would be interesting to know, like, why is it so hard for them to have that conversation? What's their history? And, you know, what were they told around the space that they take up? Were they told that if anyone else takes up space, it's taking away from their space? And I think that is how a lot of people feel, and it's why a lot of people get very activated. And helping them understand that isn't necessarily the case.
Like, what's the best advice for like a healthy sex life? I know. I feel like it's so different for everyone, but if someone came to you and was like, I just want to have like a healthy sex life, like, what are some things you would advise for them?
Okay, so first of all, I would take the word healthy and I would rip it up and I would burn it.
We are taking healthy out. Okay. And you can't even say normal. I don't know. I guess it's so true. It's
what's the question?
A good.
Or successful.
Successful.
That's a good word.
That's not putting pressure on anyone.
My therapist always is like, take out the word should or shouldn't. And I'm like,
oh, they're a good therapist. There you go. Hello.
She's literally my everything.
She's so successful, I think, are a lot of things that we've touched upon, you know. I think successful is however you define it, both for yourself and in partnership if you have a partner. And I think that requires really good communication. sitting down and talking about it, not talking about it when it gets to a challenging moment, but building in conversation, because that can also be foreplay. You know, talking about what you like, talking about what you want to explore. There's a really nice piece of communication practice that we do, which is like, if you're going to be talking about sex, start with, I love it when you do X. And then you move to, you know, that thing that we do, I'd love if we did more of Y. And then the third piece is, and how about if we try Z? And so you layer it that way in terms of like what you like, what you want to do more of that you're already doing, and maybe something that you'd like to try. There are also other techniques that you can do of like creating a sexual menu where you both really take time to think about your own erotic energy and what drives that, and building a list and then bringing it together and building a joint list, because both parties have to, you know, you can't just give your preferences to someone else and they'll do it.
This is going to be it.
Yeah.
We like.
So I think successful is often, not always, but often predicated on good communication. I also think a sense of willingness is really important, and willingness has to be consensual. But I think when we think about desire, can be hard to cultivate if you're not feeling good, if you're overwhelmed at work, if there's a lot on your plate. But are you still willing to show up? Are you still willing to show up for your sex and your joint erotic energy? And I think that it can be really important to maintain.
What would you say to a couple who's like, well, I feel like it shouldn't have to be this way. I shouldn't have to like talk about it too much. It should just come natural.
Wow. Yeah, that's loaded,
Good
isn't
one.
it?
Yeah.
I'd want to know where they learned that from.
Some people think in the beginning, like, oh, we don't really need to like talk about it too much.
Yeah.
Like, you'll figure it out, or it should come natural. I'm like, no, I need to talk about X, Y, and Z and like all of this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I'm like, where did you learn that? Who taught you that? I want to understand where that messaging comes from. I think people have the same thing about, the idea that you might need to plan a little bit around sex as well. And they're like, I don't want to plan. I want it to be like, you know, the way it used to be when we started dating, we never planned. It's like, yes, you did. You booked in a date.
Yeah.
You scheduled the whole thing in advance. That's it. But the idea that like we've never been planning, like there's always a level of planning.
That's so interesting to put it that way. Yeah.
But people don't perceive it as that. And so I think that's really interesting to talk about, is why do we not perceive that as planning?
Yeah.
And why do we not push back on that planning at the beginning? But yet when we get later down a long-term relationship, we do push back. Like, what is that change? Why do we see those as different? Like, what does that mean to that person?
What are your thoughts on the term lesbian Beth death?
I have so many thoughts. Another term that I would like to rip up, set on fire, be done with.
Oh my God.
Shall I explain it for your listeners?
Yeah. That's great,
Perfect.
actually. Yeah. A lot of people don't know.
So
Yeah.
the term lesbian bad death, which I, by the way, always trip myself up on. I called it bed rot the other day. That was strange. Actually dates back to the 80s, if you look at the history of it. I think it really originated as part of the feminist movement in the 80s, and it was a schism between, as I understand it, those that were sort of pro-sex and the women that were kind of anti-porn. And so it sort of started around that time, but it really got popularized, I think, in the 90s by some research that was done comparing long-term heterosexual couples with long-term lesbian couples. And the research showed that in long-term couples, over time, lesbians will have less sex in comparison to their heterosexual counterparts. And so the term bed death was used to, I think, invoke some shame around the tenure and the sort of intimacy at the core of lesbian relationships would be my assumption. And I think to this I say, who decided that frequency was the thing that we should all be striving for? There are plenty of people who have frequent sex who are disappointed by their sex.
A lot of people.
And there are plenty of bad orgasms out there. So just because you're having orgasms
and fake
ones. So when did frequency decide quality? I don't know if any other, like any other area of our life, whether we said, well, I had a lot of it, therefore it was good. You can have a lot of
I actually think that frequency does not, like, I think it can get boring. I think it's
100%.
very static. I think it gets forced. Like, one thing I have in the past, like, I rather have a little less sex and do more like fun, kinky things rather than doing it every day and it being like the same fucking sex. Like, honestly. Yeah. And I think people don't think that. Like, I think people are like, oh, well, to have a good sex life, you have to be having like every day. I'm like, yes, maybe sometimes, but also sometimes I'm like, you can skip a little bit and like build up that tension, excitement. And I think that's what some people like forget
quality
about.
over quantity.
And this is the thing. Subsequent research has looked at sexual satisfaction in lesbian relationships and has seen that sexual satisfaction is higher in lesbian relationships than it is in heterosexual relationships. They've also looked at
you heard that, babe.
The number of orgasms.
Another reason to start liking girls.
100%. The number of orgasms is higher in lesbian sexual encounters than it is in heterosexual sexual encounters. The average amount of time spent on a sexual encounter is almost double for lesbians than heterosexual people, and
like 12 hours.
Goes on for days.
Yeah, literally. It just doesn't stop.
Yeah, and like great.
Yeah.
And then they're more likely to say "I love you" after sex. So if
So
that
aftercare is
so lesbian.
Wait, I was saying this too. I was like, you're not a lesbian unless you've cried after sex. I'm sorry. It'll happen.
It will one day.
I mean, and that's beautiful, right? Like that is how,
so beautiful.
To me, that's really important. And so if you're a lesbian and you're worried about the sex that you're having, ask yourself, is it pleasurable? Am I enjoying it? Am I getting the satisfaction I need? If yes to all of those things, then maybe try and forget about the number thing if it's not relevant for you. If you feel like it is relevant for you, then, you know, come and talk to us about it. But I think a lot of people we all get hit with a lot of information online about how the shoulds again, what things should look like, what things should be doing. And I think having an unhelpful term like bed death hung over you isn't going to help anyone feel good about their position.
I think,
in my opinion.
I've heard of a lot of couples too, especially lesbian couples. Like, I think the bed death thing also comes to like, we feel like roommates, especially I think as, you know, two women in a relationship.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, you're together for a while, you sort of feel like you're becoming roommates and then you're not having sex. But I guess the intimacy piece comes in. As,
Yeah,
you know,
I think so. Like how...
Like, why does that go away?
Well, I think it comes down to, do you feel okay with that? Again, if both people feel okay with that, then I think we should be okay with that.
That's really cute for you.
It's true though. I do know some couples that are fine with having sex like maybe every 2 months and like they are fine with that. And I'm like, not us, but
and that's okay. Yeah.
One thing me and Faith have learned that some of our friends are like, we talk about sex a lot and we're very open about it because we know some of our friends that like are not open really about talking or kind of get shy and nervous or like talking about kinks. And I think it's so interesting. I think it's another thing is kind of knowing that about your partner because like, I mean, luckily I feel like none of our past partners have been like that or maybe some, I don't know. But it is true. Some people are not like open about talking about it. I think it's so not crazy. You guys are not crazy. But I think it's just very hard to not be open and not be able to talk about that. Because I think it's something, I do think it's important in a relationship.
Yeah, and I guess kind of like to touch on what you're saying, like maybe that is okay for a couple to enter a phase in their life where they're not having this like erotic piece to their relationship. But from what I've seen from couples that I know, typically that ends in a breakup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then I'd want to know more. I want to know more about all of those things we've spoken about that like sexual thread. Is one or both parties putting any attention to both their individual eroticism, but also their joint shared eroticism. You know, these things, we do have to, I believe, apply a little bit of active thought to them.
Absolutely.
And get rid of the idea of like the spontaneity and that it will just come at some point. Maybe for some
I feel like that
people,
really is like such a myth.
Yeah.
And especially over time too, you know, if you're like living with someone and you know, it's again that willingness to keep showing up and keep communicating, keep being willing.
Being willing. I think that's really important. And I don't know if anyone listens to Esther Perel, but she's also a big proponent of the idea of like maintaining this otherness and this separateness that I think I've mentioned. Like, and I think it's very easy if you live together and you're very comfortable to close all of that space. And actually maintaining a level of separation. And that doesn't need to be physical. That can be a little bit, a spiritual separation or an emotional separation. And that's not to say withholding from your partner, but it's making sure that you're attending to yourself as an individual and not just attending to both of you as a couple. And I think things like fantasy can be really important. Like, do you take time to fantasize on your own? Do you have your own secret fantasies? They can be a turn on just for you. You don't have to bring them into the couple. But I think they can help build some erotic tension within you that then you can bring into that couple dynamic. But I think sometimes when we live in close proximity and if we're very evenly matched and we have a relationship that's built all on equality and all of these great things, I think sometimes that some of that tension and that otherness can slightly disappear, and we need to actively reinvigorate it.
Do you have any tips, again, like specifically for lesbian couples? You know, you mentioned this separateness. Like, I feel like we kind of like become one person. I personally like love that. I'm like, I love having like my other half, like even our friends, they're always together and that really works for them. Like they're, you know, very much like this. But do you think that maybe, you know, that's like, I mean, I love that, but I'm like, is that not wise for like?
I think if that works for you and that is still working for you, then that's great.
It might not. But
no, I think there's so many different ways that it can play out, and I hope I want to give you like options.
Right.
And I'm not saying that one option is better than the other. Like we're all so individual that I think it's based on you both as an individual and then how you work as a couple. And some people just love that closeness and that being that sort of like we are one person, and that's fantastic. And that in and of itself drives pleasure. I think for other people, they need a little bit of that tension and a little bit of that separation. And that doesn't mean that you therefore have to change your lifestyle, but I think it can be small things like the fantasy, like taking time to explore yourself, like a little bit of longing and distance. Sometimes that really works. Or
I've seen both, and I've seen both be healthy and successful as well.
I have a question questions around masturbation, because I think it is something I was talking about with some of my girlfriends this weekend. Some people don't do it. Some people don't like when their partner does it. They think that you should be having sex with me. Like, why are you like doing that to yourself? And also I've heard girls that like cannot come by their partner, so they can only come by masturbating. Like, what do you like think about all of those?
So I think if you can have an orgasm with yourself, then that's great. That's a great step one. Not everyone can have an orgasm, and I think also this is another side note of why does sexual intercourse, whatever that looks like for you, always have to end in an orgasm? You know, I think that is another
it does.
Pressure point that doesn't work for everyone, because not everyone can access an orgasm, and that's fine.
That's the only goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like you lose that intimacy, honestly, when it's like, okay, well, I just want to make you finish.
Yeah.
Like, we can just make out for hours.
Yeah.
And like,
or sometimes like I get off like knowing my person, like even if I didn't fully orgasm, like I get off knowing like my person like got off, you know?
Yeah. So I think, there's so much pleasure to be had. It doesn't have to necessarily revolve around the orgasm. So if they're concerned that, they're able to orgasm when they masturbate, but not necessarily during sex, I'd say, is it still pleasurable? Are you still having fun?
Yeah.
Do you need to orgasm? I think often our partner can associate, there's a lot of ego, I think, at stake for everyone when they have sex.
Absolutely.
And the idea that if we don't make our partner come, our ego's taking a little hit.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens. And so we got to question, like, who are we orgasming for? And I think, that can be, we just want to try and alleviate some of the pressure that people experience when they're having sex. So, and also if the person is able to make themselves come by masturbating, can't they just incorporate that in? That's a perfect
or also if you can figure out for yourself, maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, like partner. This is where
exactly.
And I think some people feel really shy about that, and they don't want to hurt their partner too. And so it's like, oh, that's
that ego thing.
It can be like a tricky thing to navigate too.
100%. Yeah,
and especially if your partner's like, wait, what? I thought for so long I was,
but you were faking. That's why sometimes faking it can backfire, ladies. Yeah. But it also is such an awkward conversation. I think if you are in no matter what kind of relationship with guys or girls, like it is so awkward to be like, hey, you can't make me come. Like,
yeah, I mean, maybe I'd phrase it slightly differently. I would say, hey, literally, an orgasm is really important to me. This is really important. It seems like when we have sex, I'm not necessarily able to access it. Can we work on this together?
Bring in toys, ladies.
Yeah.
Toys are the best.
Toys, I think working on co-creating rhythm sometimes is important. I think we all orgasm at different speeds. So if one of you orgasms faster and then the other person is kind of, for want of a better term, left behind, how do you make sure that they're centered at the beginning? And how do you try and match your rhythm and your speed? It takes time, It really takes time, and I think sometimes it's important to put in that time, and yet we sort of rush to get to that point of safety that we know what our partner wants and what they don't want, and if we've not done the communication in that beginning, people might feel a little bit dissatisfied. But I think it's just about working out like what works for you and trying to leave some of those messaging behind and trying to just really focus in on the people who are there.
Have you? Sorry, have you finished? Finished.
Have you finished?
Okay.
Have you worked with couples that one person is not okay with their other partner masturbating or watching porn? It like bothers them. What have you done to like kind of help that? Have you experienced that where?
I don't care.
It doesn't bother me
personally.
But I know a lot of couples it bothers them.
Yeah, I've heard that specifically also with straight couples that's like such a thing.
Yeah, I mean it definitely comes up, and I think it's a conversation to be had around what those acts and what the engaging in those behaviors means to both people, and what are the messaging around it. Again, if they feel like pornography is something that they don't want their partner to be engaging. Why? What do they see pornography as? Do they see it as, I mean, some people even will liken it to being an affair. Is that how they see pornography? And then I would always be interested to know, well, the person who is concerned about their partner watching pornography, have they ever watched pornography? What's their relationship with it like? And I think, gosh, especially with pornography, there's a huge range out there.
Absolutely. And like what you're watching.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's like it's like, is it just like to help you kind of like get off on your own, or is it like a deeper thing? Like I think it's like just so complex. And again, just asking questions. What does this mean to you? Another question I had was, I have been with people who are like, oh, like you take so long to finish. And I'm like, that's just such like a weird thing to say personally. I mean, but then also I'm with my girlfriend. It's like, like that. But then I'm like, oh, I wonder if I was in my head, or maybe just like I didn't really feel connected to like other people I've been with. And, what are your thoughts on that? If someone like says that to you.
Also so weird.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's not necessarily the most helpful way to approach it.
Yeah.
I'd want to know more about what's really happening in the moment. Like, how have we set up this situation that we're in where it's, supposedly taking so long? What does foreplay look like? Has there been foreplay? Where's that sexual thread?
Yeah.
Has that been activated? And have you mutually spoken about your accelerators and your brakes? Like, what are your turns on and your turns off? Because maybe there hasn't been consideration for one person's turn on. So it's taking a while because all of their brakes are on and none of their accelerators on. And I think that's, as I said, both an individual and a collective thing that both, and or if you're in an alternative relationship and there's more than two of you in the room, everyone's got a little mutual responsibility as well as individual responsibility, I believe, to thinking about these things. But especially if we've had a busy long day or we're rushing around, these things can take longer.
Specifically, just to give a little context, this person, it was more of like a casual relationship, and she was just like, yeah, I feel like with other people I've been with, I can pleasure them more. And I'm like, so then I think it's like an ego thing at that point. And then it's like, there's also some sort of pressure in a sense, if you are having a casual relationship, that it's just about sex.
That's so interesting.
So it's like, it was like an awkward thing. I'm like, okay, then maybe we just shouldn't do this.
It sounds like a lot of stuff is coming up for them, which would be interesting to sort of explore, to say, how are you feeling right now? I want to check in with you, because if you were the person who's receiving the pleasure and you're still finding it pleasurable, however long it's taking, then that's okay. But are they not feeling this experience to be pleasurable? Like, they're not experiencing pleasure. Like,
it's not fast enough.
Because it's not, ascribing to some standard that they feel like is important for maybe the idea of success.
And I think it's so important for people to realize everyone in bed is different, whether it's when they come, how wet they get. Like, and I think it's so like anatomy. Well. And I think it's so funny when people can say things like this, or, I mean, I've been told, like, you aren't as wet as other girls. Well, one, you just got me in my head. Two, I've never had that problem. And then three, I'm also in my head, I'm like, maybe I'm not as attracted to that person anymore or something, because I'm like, I've never had that issues. And I think it's funny, and what everyone needs to realize, everyone is different. Like, yes, your experience with your past person or some other person might be completely different than your experience with me. And
that's where like the group sex thing kind of comes in.
100%. And that's why I do think not only communication, but the way you word things can be very important in like this scenarios.
Yes. And I also think there's something in there of, I think we commonly feel like the body's physical response is a reflection of our desire or attraction for the other person. And that, again, is a little bit of a misconception about how some people's bodies work. Some people's bodies do work like that, and some people's don't. And so understanding that it's not like a 1 + 1 = 2 situation, at least not for everyone, I think is also really important, because otherwise, we all get in our own heads, and when we're all in our own heads and we're not in our bodies, we're moving further away from being able to access that pleasure that we're looking to receive.
Do you have any tips for couples who are like, oh, I'm afraid to kind of talk about sex with my partner, like I don't know, like it's kind of a weird thing, or like one of their partners isn't, or their person isn't like comfortable about talking about sex? Like, do you have any tips to open that communication?
I mean, therapy.
Okay.
If you think it's important to have like a third person party there?
I mean, not necessarily, but I think therapy can certainly help. I think if you're afraid to speak to your partner about it, I think that's specific words. I'd be very interested to know, are you afraid to have other conversations with them? Or is this the only conversation that you're afraid to have? And what signals are you picking up on that make you afraid? Have you tried before and it's gone, it's not gone very well? Or is it a sense? And if that's about the conversation, does that also appear when you're having sex? Like, and I think for a lot of people, some people just don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
And I think because a lot of us didn't receive the tools that maybe would have been really helpful when we were at school and when we were growing up around sex and sexuality and the breadth and the depth of choices that you can actually make, and different ways you can access pleasure, and different formats you can have relationships in, if that's an open relationship or a poly relationship, or there's so many different options. And I think for a lot of people that these options weren't delivered to them in a way that made them easy to understand and allowed them to see whether they would or would not fit for them. And so I think, again, sometimes really good education can help start that conversation if you don't even know where to start.
Yeah. How would you start the conversation for a couple that one partner wants to bring in toys and the other is like not really interested? Because I think some couples can get intimidated by toys. They're like, why do you need that? Or like, am I not satisfying you?
Yeah. That's a really important question to have. And I often think people have it later than I was going to say should again. There's no shoulds. But I think
that can be helpful.
Yeah, that can be helpful. Yeah, I think so. Because when we're bringing in toys at a point where if everyone is feeling a little insecure about the sexual experience, sometimes I think that can feel like jarring, or it can be taken personally when it doesn't need to be taken personally. So I think my suggestion would be start having these conversations early and make them fun and make them exciting and make them sort of a part of the setup of the relationship rather than a response to something that they feel is becoming more challenging in a relationship. That being said, you still should be well in your right to have that conversation if you feel like this is a helpful way to rectify a challenge that you are having. I recommend having that conversation outside the bedroom when you're kind of away
in a regulated state.
And I recommend doing the technique I mentioned at the beginning about saying, hey, I love in our sex life, I love when you do anal play. That's amazing. I love that. It's great. I really wish we would have more sex in the shower because, we've done it a couple times and that's really fun. And, I've been thinking that actually it could be fun to try bringing a toy into the bedroom because that could get me extra stimulation on my clitoris and, it could just be a really fun thing for us to explore.
So just make it in a more fun way, you're saying.
Yeah.
It would be so serious.
Lighthearted.
Yeah, and starting with the compliment and starting with the, really layering it in a way that feels like inviting of them and you're co-creating that space with them.
Do you have any tips for a couple in a new relationship to have a successful sex life? Like, what would you tell someone from the get-go?
Okay.
Incorporate these things.
Okay, and you want me to say it again?
If you can say it anywhere. Yeah.
I guess for a new couple in a relationship, my recommendations would be start talking about sex and make it part of your foreplay. Start communicating about your preferences, your desires, and build that in a way that's really sensual and sexy and can be really fun. I think my second piece would be I think the importance of fantasy and engaging your erotic mind. And you can do that individually or you can do that collectively, but sort of give yourself permission to explore what excites you and see where that takes you. And then my third piece would be, really just think about pleasure. I think desire can be overwhelming sometimes for some people. I think orgasms can sometimes be hit or miss. So focus on what's pleasurable to you and what's pleasurable to both of you. And if you find that, then I think that's perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this topic, me and Faithlyn love talking about. We could go on for hours.
Yeah.
You were amazing, and I think our viewers are gonna love this.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you.
I hope they find it helpful.
Yes,
oh my God,
they will.
I'm like, oh my God.
I know. I
so
literally felt like I was in a therapy session in the best way. I was like, wow, I really just once again opened my mind.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
And also, we'll obviously tag everything, but if you want to just share viewers if there's like a way to find you.
Oh, yeah.
To set up a session.
Yeah.
Or if you have some sort of like social media where you talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And if you want to know more, I think we're going to link my Psychology Today profile in the notes. So you can find me there and we can also share my email. So if you have any questions or if any of the conversation got you thinking, then I would love to talk to you.
Yay. And thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.